Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's panel. We are going to be talking about Blacks in the arts. So we've got two wonderful guests with us today. I believe we've got some more coming, but I'll give you guys a chance to introduce yourselves. But first, if you have any questions for any of our lovely guests, you can ask them via Mentimeter. So if you go to www.menti.com, so that's MENTI.com, and type in the code, which is, just here on the screen. So it's 6588223. So 6588223. So if you make a note of that, then you can go over to Mentimeter and you can ask any questions that you have. Right, so how about you guys just introduce yourselves?
After you.
Hi, I'm Estella Adeyeri. I'm a musician. I play in the bands Big Joni and Charmpit.
Okay. I'm Darius Kudibble-Thompson, and I'm an actor/writer. And currently, I've just graduated from Durham University, and I'm planning to apply to drama school. And I'm currently writing a new play with my friend. Yeah.
And I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Mata. I'm a former graduate of Glasgow University. I am not a professional, but I kind of started off doing a lot of music and drama, and then decided that that wasn't the right path for me. Partly, I suppose, due to the fact that I am a Black woman, and I felt that that wasn't really my place. So I suppose that kind of leads into the first question. So how would you guys kind of sum up your experience in the arts? If you could only say like one sentence, or how would you sum it up?
It's a tough one. It's pretty varied, you know. I mean, there are some times when I'm like, you know, there is so much, especially now that I'm older and I'm starting to be sort of creating my own sort of path in terms of like what sort of acting I do, what sort of, you know, things that I write. I feel like there's a lot more, you know, accessibility, not just for, you know, representing myself in a sort of contemporary setting, but also sort of putting myself and, you know, the Black image into things like, you know, Shakespeare. Like I worked for the Globe last summer, and last summer they did a production of Henry IV, and Henry IV was Black, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Because I remember when I was like 14, and I was just like, this is the whitest Shakespeare production I've ever seen in my life, and feeling like, you know, they can't, it's just not possible, or like it's impossible for, you know, the Black image to be represented in, you know, anything other than the sort of limited things that I was sort of used to grow up. But like now it's sort of, it's much more accessible. But there have been a lot of times where I was like, you know, the representation was limited, that it was like, you know, you count on like one hand what sort of, you know, representations we'd see on the screen or on the stage. So yeah, I guess that's where we're going to start with that.
I guess it's, yeah, quite difficult to narrow down in music. My bands kind of play in, I guess, like punk scenes, so they tend to be presumed to be like predominantly white spaces. I think perhaps in more recent years, there's a bit more understanding of the amount of Black people, people of colour in alternative music scenes, and how much of a history that Black people have in those scenes as well, whether or not it's routinely archived. So it's been interesting kind of existing in that space the past couple of years. I guess like seeing the moves in more DIY spaces to make an effort to include people of colour, and then realise as you shift out of those spaces, how little effort is made in the mainstream. So yeah, that's been my experience.
Cool. And hello, Alaska. Would you just like to just quickly introduce yourselves?
Hiya, I'm Alaska. I'm an actress and writer from London. My pronouns are she, they.
So the question I just asked the other two was just if you could very quickly sum up your experience within the arts. So like in a sentence or so.
Sometimes being black is okay. I don't know.
Sorry, I feel that. I feel that. That's the best sentence I've ever heard.
Sorry, yeah, I've recently applied to loads of BAME schemes that have just mysteriously appeared magically after Black Lives Matter. So I was like, nice, let me capitalize on that. So there have been some writing programs and some acting programs specifically for kind of BAME writers and actors. So I think that's been nice, but it's not always that nice.
Mm.
And we have our final guest, yay. If you could just introduce yourself for all of us.
Hi, I'm Etienne. I'm calling on the train from Brighton. And so my Wi-Fi might be a bit slow, but I'm happy to meet you all, and I hope I'll be a good guest for you all.
Cool. So yeah, the question that everyone's just kind of answered is kind of what's been your experience in the arts, and like whether you could kind of sum it up in around a sentence or so.
I describe my experience in the arts as being very kind of limited and not very, because there's not a lot of like-minded people like me, and not a lot of people of color as well inside the arts, so it makes it very hard to branch out and connect with people. Sorry, that wasn't a sentence.
No, perfect.
That's good. That's good.
So I think pretty much all of you could have spoke about representation in some kind of form. So I think, was there like, because I think so just for those who weren't here, I kind of spoke about like very briefly about how when I was younger, I did a lot of singing, I did a lot of acting and dancing, and you know, in an ideal world I probably would have gone into musical theatre, but you know, when I was looking at roles, I would see either, you know, I think the only black role I saw when I was younger was like the black characters in Hairspray. And as a mixed race woman, I was like, oh, am I too white to play the black characters in Hairspray? So I always felt like that wasn't really my place. So I think, was there someone or maybe a group of people who kind of inspired you to get into the arts? Or was it even that the fact that there wasn't any representation, was that the reason that you wanted to get into the arts?
I think a lot of it was about kind of being someone new to the arts, like kind of like, oh my God, we kind of like the first Black people doing this genre of music, because there isn't anyone that you could look up to see like, wow, there's someone who already does this stuff. So a lot of going into it was like yeah, we're kind of the only people that be into that genre. So
Oh, I think you just cut out there. Oh.
Hello?
Hello. Okay,
yeah.
you again.
Oh God, did it freeze?
Yeah, you cut out just a bit there.
Hello?
Hello?
I think I froze.
Okay. Okay. Well, does anyone else want to answer?
Yeah, I can go.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's a mixture of like my mum very much exposed me to the arts. Like we always went to the theatre when I was kids. I watched a lot of film, a lot of a lot of TV in general. But I think definitely as a teenager, representation got better. I don't remember seeing kind of like big mixed race and black roles until watching things like Blackish and seeing Zoe Kravitz in like those Divergent films. And I was like, okay, maybe I can be an actor. Maybe there is space for me.
I think for me, like my family were into like music and stuff. I had an older sister who played in bands and things, so I already had like a direct role model who was doing what I wanted to do anyway. And there were, I guess, throughout when I was growing up, like occasionally I would see like a black woman in alternative music, like, you know, growing up with Top of the Pops, you'd see Skin from Skunk Anansie. So obviously a huge alternative band at the time. And then we had Shingy from the Noisettes playing bass and fronting an indie band. And then sort of learning later about like polystyrene from X-Ray Specs and things like that, and realizing that it wasn't just the odd people here and there throughout time. Like have been here, I guess, like Kelly from Block Party was another big one for my kind of grown up period. And I guess Dev Hynes in his various guises like Blood Orange and Intesticles and Lightspeed Champion and stuff. So yeah, like I kind of felt like even though there wasn't like a lot of representation, there was still kind of direct role models that I could look up to and be like, well, they're doing it and they seem to be like excelling at it as well. So why shouldn't it be something that I also do?
Role models. I did have a few. I mean, like there weren't. It wasn't like there was no representation. It was just like how they were being represented that I always sort of, well, I became more conscious of as a problem when I got to my teenage years. When I was younger, it was more a case of my mum sort of, you know, started taking me to music and drama classes, and I never really noticed that, oh, I'm actually the only person of color here, not even the only black person, but the only person of color. That never really occurred to me when I was younger. But when I started going to like secondary school, and then we used to do productions, and you know, casts always be like, you know, the usual suspects, and then the usual suspects turn out to be that you and like one other guy from, you know, the year are the only two black people there, and we're just sort of there, like, you know, this, like, from that I sort of learned that I've got to stake my own claim based on my ability and not my color. Like that was my whole sort of mentality from then on, was just like, you know, it's not about, well, here's the thing, this industry is a lot about what I look like, but I've just got to sort of go in there and be like, you know, no matter what I look like, I can still play Hamlet. I can still, you know, come in and be King Lear, or I can come in here and, you know, say I'm going to do a production of Fences and that is what it is, or I'm going to do write a play about, you know, mental health and it's going to be an all black cast and that's going to be completely fine. But I think as I got older, it started to be more of a case that things started to change, and I'm sort of feeling a bit more optimistic now, because I'm looking at, you know, things like the Globe and, you know, the old Vic, and, you know, seeing people like John Boyega, who I love, by the way, and you know, looking at the Avengers, Chadwick, who has just passed away. It was really, for me, that was like that for me. Black Panther, I think for me, was just like, now it's getting into like, we're getting like big films where they're actually sort of representing our culture as well as our people and our faces. So I feel like we're sort of at a turning point now, and yeah, for me, it was always about, you know, staking my claim with my ability, and now I'm saying, you know, the sort of a synthesis between, you know, the fact that my face and my image is becoming more accepted. I'm not sure if it's 100% accepted. There are still shows out there that, you know, are complete whitewashes, but, you know, we're making much more progress than when I was younger. So I'm hopeful, I guess.
I think when you obviously just mentioned Black Panther, and I think so many people kind of saw Black Panther and was like, this is the representation that we needed. I remember watching it in the cinema and I just cried at the end, not because of anything to do with the story, but because I was just like, if I'd seen this when I was 10 years old, I would have, I don't know, I felt like I would have felt much better about myself and what I could have done. So I think kind of from that is there a kind of, would you say that there is a lack of representation when it comes to the arts, particularly in the UK?
A lack of representation. I think there's so much more that we can do. I feel like especially in the heat of how all the things that have gone on in 2020 and now things are changing. And yes, I am optimistic. I feel like at this stage, they're still chucking sort of crumbs and bones at representation in terms of how they do it and what they're doing. Like, say, for example, has anyone seen the new Noughts and Crosses show that came out? No? Okay, so BBC, they did like an adaptation of Noughts and Crosses, which I was like, yeah, that's great, that's good, this is progress. But then on the other hand, they did an adaptation of His Dark Materials, and then I look at the show and I'm like, you know, it's all well and good that you've done a adaptation of a book that would, give the opportunity for Black characters, but like, why aren't we having the same sort of energy in a show in which, there isn't explicitly Black characters written into the script, if that makes sense? Like, I saw a all Black production of Hamlet set in, I think it was some sort of, it was meant to be sort of, West Africa or something like that, but it wasn't really specific about it. And I was like, look, this is what I want. This is what I want to be able to see, that, it isn't just like, I think I've said this before, but I don't want to just be cast as, gangster number 3. I don't want that. I don't want to be just cast as, like, I'm all for the civil right. I feel they're doing like John Mayer and Lupita Nyong'o are doing like a production that's set in, I think it's apartheid South Africa or something like that. Like, I'm all for having that on screen, but I also want to be able to be in, mainstream media, so to speak, that it can be like I'm just in, a sort of main character in EastEnders or something like that, or Hollyoaks, or, there's much more to go on. We need to be integrated into everything rather than being like, okay, you can have this, you can have this, you can have this, but oh wait, you can't be in there, sort of thing. It's like we're boxed in one room. I think, if that makes sense, if anyone can sort of relate to that.
I definitely can relate to that. I can like bounce off some of your points about like, I think a lot of people are like almost disappointed by like Black people getting like, I can't describe it, it's like the struggle film. I don't think anyone wants to see that anymore. I think we've all kind of moved beyond, like, I don't want to see any more struggle films. I want to see an all Black high fantasy film. Like, as soon as we can get to the level of like, there is Blackness within multiple genres of like theatre and cinema, that is when things become interesting and we kind of integrate more culturally. If you look at like the Arts Council, like the facts and figures for like the BAME in theatre, it's not fantastic. So I think there is a representation problem, but I don't think we're gonna solve it by doing like color blind casting and then just still hiring someone from RADA who's white, because they're supposedly like the best actor for the job. Like, if you're conscious and you just like have Black roles that are important and interesting and that aren't stereotypes, that is so much better than just kind of skirting around it.
I wonder as well, like, if you've noticed like a similar thing maybe in the acting world, of the way like British artists are, or like Black British artists are treated in the States compared to how they are treated at home. Because I think we've had an analogous experience in music, where America has been very receptive to Big Joni specifically. We're a 3-piece battle, 3 Black women, and it's always been Americans who've wanted to release our music, to take the risk of putting out our album or whatever. And whereas UK labels were much more wary, or like we started getting big press in the US, and then the UK kind of followed when we've been playing in the UK for like 7 years, like playing those same songs, like. So, and yeah, I've kind of heard similar musings from actors, but it's not my field, so I wasn't sure if it's kind of a similar thing that you've maybe noticed.
I think that's an interesting point about the reception, you know, a Black artist was received in the States versus how they would be received here. I feel like it's almost like England or the UK in itself, in terms of music and in terms of acting, they're sort of traditional in the sense that they will put you in a little box and be like, you're Black, you can't do anything more than R&B, rap, hip hop and all of that. But then they'll go to the States and there's a little bit more leeway, because I feel like the States, sometimes there is a bit more of, you know, support. I mean, I see a lot of actors being like, you know what, there's nothing for me here. They go to the States and then all of a sudden they're popular there and they able to come back. I mean, I know I could think of one person I could think of that did that is Idris, particularly comes to mind. But this is probably the only person I can think of currently. But like, you can see the sort of, at least in terms of the films that are being released, or even the sort of theatre productions that are being made over in the States on Broadway, and the sort of representation that they're being given. I want to say Hamilton, but I'm not gonna lie, I haven't seen it, so I can't. I refuse to watch it for many reasons. But like, yeah, that as an example of, you know, sort of transcending what is sort of acceptable, so to speak, for the sort of an actor or a theatre production, and sort of like breaking those barriers and being like, you know, rap has a place within the, you know, the theatre canon now in terms of musical theatre. So yeah, I do feel like it is very much, you know, the US is sort of more willing to accept our you know, like these transcending these spaces.
I mean, look at Afropunk. It took us years to get Afropunk in the UK, and then I think it stayed for 2 years. So I don't know. Yeah, I think America can be like ahead of us in the arts for kind of Black representation and support in that sense.
I was going to say as well, in case you can hear me, I've realized that BBC Three has had a lot of like good, like, you know, cast of like Black people in their whole like channels. Like, I don't know why, but I think they're much more receptive to having more Black characters, and have like, for example, like Famalam that came out recently that has a whole Black cast, and it's just like, that was unbelievable to me. And something like just having like a cast full of Black characters seems to me is like, it's weird, even though like every other show has full-on white characters. And it's the fact that that's weird. Seeing that, to me, is like, it just goes to show how underrepresented we are in like just the arts as well.
I think that's a quite a good point, because I remember seeing some kind of discussion about The Wiz, which is basically The Wizard of Oz but an all Black cast, and everyone was saying like, oh, this is racist because they've excluded white people, and basically saying like, oh, can you imagine the fury if there was an all white cast of The Wizard of Oz? To which everyone was like, there is, it's the original film. And like, there does seem to be a kind of an almost double standard, where if you have an entire white cast of anything, whether it is an all white band, or you know, you have an art gallery that's full of all white artists, no one will blink an eye. But as soon as they're all Black, everyone goes, you must have, you've not allowed white people the chance, this is terrible. I think, I mean, yeah, what do you guys think? I feel like there's just, yeah, it's always just one rule for them and another for us.
Yeah, there's a really big double standard in where they don't really allow Black people into white spaces, but the other way around, like they kind of cause an uproar that white people should be allowed in Black spaces as well, even though it's kind of like, it's the exact same thing. It's like, you know, we should have our own space, you have your own space, And the reason why we want our own space is because we don't have a space at all in like society to, you know, have a place to perform and just be a normal character instead of a character that's written, no, not white. It's just like everyone just gets shoehorned into the ethnic person of color role, and like they're all interchangeable. They're just, you know, instead of just normal characters.
Yeah, I feel that. But, you know, just before I continue, I think when you brought up BBC, that was 3, that was a very important point, because Famalam, I just watched season 2. Funny, very, very, very funny, very, very sort of keen about, you know, the issues that are going on in the world. And Enterprise, which has you know, Roll Safe, the guy Roll Safe, he's in it as well. So I'm just thinking, it's like, so people like, even if I use Roll Safe as an example, it like BBC 3 is giving them sort of, you know, a space to sort of express, you know, that comedic element. Like some of Roll Safe who started on the internet has now been given a space in sort of, I guess, mainstream media, so to speak. I mean, BBC is, you know, mainstream. BBC 3 isn't, you know, too up there, but it's sort of going and doing its own thing. But one thing that I always, you know, my mom and my dad always used to say to me if I was going into arts is like, you know, if they don't give you space at their table, go and build your own. But when we go and build their own, they then want a space at our table. So it's a bit of a catch-22. We can't go into theirs, but as soon as we build our own, it's like, nah, we can't have you having this sort of independently. And it's difficult, but I guess sort of a big thing as being an artist is about, you know, sticking with, you know, to your guns, so to speak, and being sort of, you know, right, look, I'm making this space for me, a safe space for me and, you know, people like me, because you haven't allowed me into the mainstream. Now it's becoming popular. You're not going to crush it. You're not going to stop it. And we're going to keep growing, and we're going to keep doing what we're doing. And yeah, it's sort of having a resilience is something that I've sort of been taught if I'm going to sort of enter this industry. It's not necessarily, oh yeah, I'm going to be auditioning for roles, but sometimes I'm going to have to be writing my own roles, which is why I sort of started being like, you know what, I need to get on that writing vibe now.
Just to jump on what was mentioned earlier, but like, when I know that when Steph was starting our band, and she'd just put on like Facebook or something, was like, oh, I want to start like a Black feminist punk band. And she said that she did actually get pushback from people being like, oh, but like, how dare you start a Black band? Like, it's unfair that white people can't be in it, when it's like literally like one person like just starting their own band and like putting their own limits on. So I thought that was ridiculous. And that, I think, maybe I would hope wouldn't happen as much today, but it happened at a time when the punk scene was even whiter than it is now. So yeah, it's just absurd to me. And yeah, like what you're saying about like building your own table, which is what we tried to do with Decolonize Fest, which is I guess like a DIY version of like Afropunk or something like that, kind of similar ideals to how that started. But yeah, like an alternative festival where every person on stage is a person of color, like it's all like alternative punk or experimental music, and everyone on the organizing team for the festival is a person of color, but anyone's welcome to attend. So like white people can attend, and even just like explaining why it's only POC organized, and like just the way it makes certain white people uncomfortable to like not be involved is quite funny to me, really.
Yeah, I think because I've had similar things when we've kind of spoken about like gender equality in music, and I think recently there's been a lot of discussion about gender equality in music, especially when it comes to festivals, where, you know, people will look at, you know, Reading and Leeds and Glastonbury, obviously back when they were running, and they would see, you know, the top 3 headliners would all be men, or they'd be mostly men, and people would be saying, but what about all these amazing female artists? And you'd hear the same kind of pushback of like, oh, but why should I have to pick just a woman because she's a woman, when that's not the point that we're actually trying to make across. And I feel like people use the same arguments when it comes to representation around race as well. Just it's that idea of, oh, but why should I have to pick someone just because they're black? Cool. So I think we've got some questions from Menti. So just remember, you can still submit questions. If you go to menti.com, so menti.com, and put in the code 6588223. So 6588223. Oh, there we go. It's just on there. Cool. Actually, just before we go on to questions from Menti, I think just from that discussion that we've just had, I think how do I word this? Is there any way that you guys could think of kind of solving this problem? Because obviously one way to solve it would be to kind of have a quota almost. So, you know, every film has to have X amount of black actors, every band or every festival has to have X amount of black musicians, every art gallery has to have X amount of black artists in there, which to me feels tokenizing. What would you guys say?
I feel like no matter what really happens, I feel like we won't really be happy about it, because we're not getting chosen out of merit. They're kind of getting chosen because they're forced to. And it kind of should have been this thing of like, we should have already been there in the first place. But at the same time, if we make people choose and have a quota, we won't really feel happy because we're chosen because of a quota. And it's kind of that, like, you know, that catch-22, like there's no way out of it unless we kind of make our own spaces to have our you know, promoted, because it doesn't feel like we're being chosen because we're black. We're being chosen because we have like merit, and that kind of comes from having our own spaces, I feel.
I do agree that sort of building our own spaces is probably the best way to get that balance between we're getting chosen because we're merit and also we're being represented fairly as people of color. I feel over time things will slowly change, and you know, in terms of like educating people that actually it's about changing the sort of psychological thought about, you know, because a lot of time if, you know, I go into a room to do some sort of audition, a lot of people that or directors that I have met in the past, some of them tend to be like, you know what, I am going in looking at complete ability, but some people will also be sort of very concerned about, you know, height, weight, you know, how you look. Do you sort of look like Hamlet, or do you sort of look like Othello, or do you sort of look sort of, you know, how I want you to look physically? Which also has its own implication, because one of those things that you look for physically will be skin tone eventually. So it's about changing that psychology to, you know, reflect more on, you know, ability. And I guess sort of like before, when, you know, spaces never used to, or never in at any sort of capacity existed for people of color, it was sort of, they were picking ability. But as soon as it's sort of being like, you know, black people want to act, and you know, people of Asian descent want to act as well, they sort of had to sort of rethink it and sort of change that psychology of like, you know, these people have talent as well. Because, you know, I feel like it is very much going to be an educational thing, which will change over time. I'm not sure exactly how to go forward with that education about that change in that mindset, but I think it's more of a generational thing. But I'm not sure how I would change it for, you know, today's sort of you know, casting directors. If anyone wants to, you know, give me any ideas on how.
I think casting directors basically just need to be workshops on like casting POC and not having colorblind casting, and just being for and way more intelligent about the projects they choose and how they cast. There's a great Galdem article about like some of the casting in normal people and how a lot of the people of color in normal people aren't like the best of roles, and it's because of colorblind casting rather than like being way more aware about kind of issues and how Black people are portrayed within TV. So I think definitely currently casting directors just need to be like workshopped, but I think over time definitely will hopefully get better.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the answer is in music. Besides, maybe I still think the industry is a lot slower to change than people who actually listen to and consume and create music. Like, I feel like in more recent years, or maybe looking at the generations coming up who are younger than me, are a lot less constrained by genre. And I don't know if that reflects, you know, like with streaming now, you have like access to so many different things at your fingertips. So you can be going from like metal to like, I don't know, electro in like the blink of an eye. So yeah, I feel like having more of that understanding that kind of like what Darius was saying earlier, that like Black people can perform a range of genres and don't have to be pigeonholed into one particular sphere. And also realize that listeners as well tend to have quite diverse tastes, I find these days, like a lot less strict about like only listening to one type of music or only expecting one type of person to be making that music. And I think because the industry is obviously dominated by cishet white men, it's there that the change is slowest because they hold all the power and tend to stick to very outdated ideals of how the industry works.
I was thinking as well, there's a very big factor of like money being involved with record labels, and kind of that money absolutely like crushes like independent artists, and also more so for Black artists, because we're going against people with the millions of pounds into festivals. And the truth about Reading and Leeds is that everyone that headlining, they're all kind of in the same agency and have the same management. And that's why most of these people are headlining all the time. And with something like that, we wouldn't be able to compete against it because they've kind of already chosen who's going to be on that lineup before we even get a chance to like be chosen for it. It's kind of like, it's not in our favor to even be able to kind of get into that, you know, that kind of place, you know?
Well, that was good. We're right. We'll move on to some questions submitted by our lovely audience. Here's one. So, do you ever feel as though there is pressure to move away from the arts, for example, due to the level of uncertainty and risk involved by family? For example, in deciding where you've taken education or how you've made decisions to progress your careers.
I guess I didn't study music, and it probably wouldn't have been considered a viable thing for me to study because of the uncertainty, really, or, you know, the assumption is you like go and get a proper job or whatever. So like I don't do music full time, and I would like, even though it's taking up more of my time recently, the assumption would still be that I would have like my mainstream job and make sure that I'm still focusing on that career. Like if I said I was going to give up my day job and pursue music, like I think my mum would just be like, no, like, what are you doing? Like it's just not done. Like no. Like the emphasis growing up was like I was supported to, you know, like play instruments and stuff, but there was still a lot of emphasis on like academic subjects and going off and pursuing that, and that seemed to be like the road, and music was always like a hobby or fun or something like exciting to do on the side. It was never like the thing.
My mom to this day is asking me about, how serious I am about doing this acting thing and, going to drama school and, pursue that, because especially in these times where you have people like, Rishi Sunak being like retrain, and I'm like, no, thank you. Like, obviously I'm multifaceted and I'm flexible. Like, I could go and do a normal job, but that's not what I want. I do want to be, and it's not even like I'm doing it because people, like, I guess, with like the sort of mentality that was being projected in that terrible advert was that almost we do this with that anyone that does any sort of art is just doing it for the fun of it. Yeah, don't get me wrong. I love my job and it is fun, but I'm doing it because I love to create art. I love to, inspire minds and change hearts. That is a big part of what I do. And like, I mean, throughout history, there are a lot of things that wouldn't exist if we didn't have that sort of creative vibe that has now been sort of, pushed aside and demonized as being an art, so to speak. And yeah, I do sort of get that sort of pressure, especially, about the way I look, the build I have, and like, will I be able to get into drama schools and the money and the difficulty. But I think the one thing that spurs me on is just like, that sort of image in my mind of when I get to where I want to get to is the fact that I'll be sort of like, influencing people's lives with what I'm producing on stage, the sort of image I'm giving, not just of myself, but the worlds I create. And I feel that is very important. And, there's not enough representation. So like it is a big deal for us to be like, okay, I'm going to go into the arts and sort of give, add more to the mix, so to speak. And like in doing that, I'll have a voice and a position in order to, you know, be a part of the arts and say, yes, I'm here. Yes, I exist. Yes, we exist. And we are more than just, thugs, gangsters, drug dealers, and prostitutes. Please don't quote me on that. But yeah, I do struggle and think about it every day I get out of bed. But yeah, it's part of being an artist, I guess.
Well, did everyone answer?
I think I'm like the least qualified person to answer that question, just because my parents are like, "You go be an actor, honey. We've got you." That's really
fair.
nice of them.
Really fair. It's fine, cool. Well, we'll move on to the next question. So, how can I help others, particularly those who aren't Black themselves, identify and differentiate representation in the arts from tokenism? Hello.
Sorry, my phone died.
Do you want me to repeat the question, or?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
please. That'd be amazing.
So, how can I help others, particularly those who aren't Black themselves, identify and differentiate representation in the arts from tokenism?
I think for oh, did you want to go, Etienne?
Yeah, but I was gonna say, I think a lot of that will be kind of having to build your own community, like kind of your small communities, and like promote yourselves and like find other communities as well, like little groups that you can like connect around. Because kind of a big part of it is having enough people to be able to like promote yourselves. And with that, when you have your small communities, you all have kind of like can build enough money and help each other to develop, because a big part of it as well is like having the funds in order to get to that stage, and having a small community could help
Yeah, and yeah, kind of building on what Etienne said, like I mean, obviously it's shut now, but I really liked DIY Space where they had this like accountability agreement for how people were going to treat each other in that venue, and like one point of it was to not make assumptions about like anyone who's in that space. And I think in terms of music, that can be like a good thing to bear in mind, like not just see a band and make an assumption of what they're going to sound like just by sizing them up and looking at them and stuff. And I think for if you want to avoid like tokenizing, for me, it's hard to explain, but it feels very like obvious when you're being tokenized. So like, for example, like my band got asked to play on this bill where it just didn't make sense for us to be on it, and we would have been the only Black people on it. So it's like all these other bands had already been chosen, and then we got asked, but we didn't really fit musically. The time that they wanted us to play didn't really make sense, and it felt very obvious. Whereas I've played on other bills with a mixture of white artists where I haven't felt that way, because it's quite clear that musically we kind of make sense together, or we're already in a similar scene or whatever, or like it's been thought out. And yeah, like for example, like the Idols tour that we're going to be playing on, like they're a post-punk band, they've asked a post-punk band to play. So it's really like, I don't know how to explain to someone how not to tokenize, because it's like Black people can tell when it's happening. So it's like, don't do it, but I'm not sure how to tell you not to do it other than to, yeah, like just, it's fine to be like intentional and be, or like you can be upfront about it, like, oh, I'd like, could anyone recommend some bands with POC? I'd like to book some for my gig, for example, rather than making it like weird and tokenistic.
I think
Yeah.
I'm saying you go.
I'll go very quickly. But what was I going to say? I think in acting, theatre and film, a way to spot tokenism is just stereotypes, especially with like Black female characters. Is this character the Mammy? Is she the Jezebel? Is she the Sapphire? Does she have wants and needs that go beyond, that are relatable and three-dimensional? If they are, she's probably a well-developed character. If she's just kind of one-dimensional, the angry Black sassy friend, probably a token. Look for heart, look for truth, look for something you can relate to as someone who maybe isn't POC. If you see that, that character probably isn't a token.
Yeah, I think that was very good. You know, what was I going to say? I think what I wrote down just so I could remember it is like the best way to sort of recognize, you know, identify it at least, or like before I say about how not to do it yourself, identifying it is, you know, think about, is looking at the context of what's going on and think about the heart behind it. I think we've had a lot of, like, I think the most recent controversy I've heard about in terms of like tokenization and just sort of, you know, throwing, you know, people of color a bone, so to speak, was Mulan, which they did like a live action version of. And as well as Mulan having sort of, you know, nationalist tendencies, which there was sort of like people China were not happy about, I felt like it was sort of highly sort of symbolic in the way they did it, because I was just like, you know, I know they're doing all these sort of remakes, and it almost like you can tell it was almost like they were trying to be like, look, we are diverse too with this film. There would be very like, it was, I don't know how to explain it. It was just very obvious to me as a person, like you get it, Tony. It just, you could just sense it just by the way they were doing it. Whereas like something like going back to Black Panther, there were people that I was speaking to and they were saying, oh, but maybe what isn't that the same thing? And I was like, the reason it's not the same thing is because they specifically said, look, Black Panther is part of the Marvel universe and we're going to bring in him, but they did it correct. They did it properly. They got a Black director in. They did tons of research about, Black culture. And I know they did tons of research about, Asian culture, but they were like, you can definitely tell that was somewhat tokenistic in their sort of their heart behind doing it, because when they released it, COVID came along and they were like, we've got to make money. Let's release it on Disney Plus and you have to pay for it. So that in itself tells you that it was sort of like it was a money-making ploy at the expense of, Milan and representation, so to speak. That in itself, I feel like proves that to me. In terms of not doing it yourself, in terms of tokenizing, I would say is think about like, if like, I very much agree about being upfront with it. If you're being like, look, we have this part and we need a Black actor to play it, or we want to have some sort of diversity because our cast is looking very light in terms of representation, that upfrontness, I would be more likely to accept it than being sort of like, sort of being around the bush about it. But if you're going to be casting in general and you're just, you don't want to be tokenizing in doing it, like, be very sort of aware and conscious of when you're sort of casting people about being like, look, I am looking not at their face, not at their build, not at their color. I'm looking at their ability to play the role and sort of get the heart and soul of the character rather than, how they look. Because I think that would be the short way. It's about being conscious about it, I guess.
Cool. Right. Next question. Why do you think depictions of the culture seem to not only but particularly thrive? Oh, sorry. Why do you think depictions of the culture seem to thrive in a satirical form to drama, of drama, sorry, i.e. Blackish, Famalam? Can we be taken seriously without having to make them laugh first?
I'm not sure anymore. I feel like in times in which people take Black kind of films and art seriously, it's when it's like a struggle film, when it's a slave film, when it's, a police brutality film. It's like only when we suffer can we be taken seriously. But I think it's nice to see kind of kitchens and dramas where, there is that kind of mundaneness in life that is also dramatic, that can be in TV, that can be in film. I don't know. I don't think we should have to kind of bleed in order to be taken seriously in TV and film. That's my hot take.
I feel that is very correct. I feel like, making sort of, I guess, sort of comedy and satire of, Black culture has this sort of fine line with almost being, I don't know. I feel we can be taken seriously. I just feel like it's going to take some time before it's a case of, we're doing all black, plays and films about things that are not just, satire like Famalam. But even then, with Famalam and Blackish, I think they've done it. The clever thing about the way that the writers have done it is it's sort of like, yes, it's funny, but in the way that it's sort of funny and silly funny, there are bits of it in which it's funny, but it's making a very, very poignant point that needs to be said. And like, it's sort of like, even when I was watching Family Man season 2, like I binged watched it on my way back from a trip this weekend. And when I was watching it, there were some bits in it that I was like, wow, that really sort of, touched my soul. And they've very intricately, was it season 2 or season 3? I can't remember. But yeah, they've very intricately woven, like storylines for each character through, and they've really fleshed them out and really sort of, made very sort of clear points about society, about being Black, about our existence, about the internet and whatnot. And I think that in itself is sort of tongue-in-cheek seriousness, that's something that other pieces of art have struggled to do. And I think that is sort of very important in its own right. But yeah, I do think, you know, in time we'll be able to be taken seriously in anything other than a struggle film.
I think there was two good, like there was a series called Chewing Gum that came out recently, and the same actor as well was in another show called, I'm not sure if it was a show or movie called I Will Destroy You. And I think that's a really good movie. It's about that aren't like struggle movies, but they're like one's one's in a comedy, but it's not about kind of being black in a way. I'm not too sure because I've only seen like a few episodes of Chewing Gum, honestly.
Yeah, I've been thinking of I May Destroy You kind of as you were talking as well. I guess because of the way like it mixed like the really heavy like dark experience that she has, and then also there are like specific moments of like light relief, and then also really specific like cultural moments that are things that you get as like a Black British person as well. And I think it was maybe in Galdem that they were talking about that as well, actually, like kind of the flicking between like accents when you're speaking to like your parents or whatever, and then like with you like your friends and all of this, and like code switching. And I guess like, yeah, maybe that was the first show in a while I'd seen that that had such like dense material that wasn't just about her being black. Like you know, like sexual assault can happen to anybody, and yeah, that's like a main part of the story arc. But her friendships and experiences and her Black British experience is kind of just, that is like the backdrop and the setting. So yeah, I thought that was quite cool. I don't know if you've all seen that as well and what you thought about it.
I think I do agree that that is something that is, this is the first in a while that I've seen of it being like, but I think that is sort of a very sort of key point about, you know, what she's done by, you know, creating I Will Destroy It, is sort of making it clear that, you know, this can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter what race or color you are, like it literally can happen to anyone. And she very sort of like, she made a very clear point about art itself as well, about how, you know, that actresses and actors can, you know, do these sort of serious pieces and be of color, because, you know, it's a human experience rather than a racial experience in this. Because I feel like a lot of racial representation about the racial experience, which there's no problem with that, but we need to, you know, develop further than that. And I feel like that's what I mean by like, you know, this is a starting point and this is a turning point in 2020 that I feel that, you know, we'll progress and move forward with that.
Okay, next question. How would you recommend moving from the stereotypical boxes people might place you in? So, for example, Black musicians being expected to perform rap or R&B.
For me, it was kind of just like getting on with it, really, because that was like some of the music I was listening to, or yeah, like I started playing guitar at 13, and I started with an electric guitar. Like I wanted to be loud and play the music that was around at the time, and it was like, you know, I grew up, I want to say, in the height of emo, so like that's the backdrop that I had to like try and play along to. So yeah, I guess like, I think it helps to kind of put yourself out there and be visible as well. Like seeing other like kind of Black musicians did really help. Like I remember in my first band, so the first band I was in, we started when I was still living in York, because that's where I went to uni and stuff. And we played with the Go team, and that had been like the most women of color I'd shared a stage with like ever at that time. So I had like 4 women in that band and 2 guys, and like, yeah, predominantly women of color as well. And they're obviously like kind of a mix of like indie, poppy and stuff, and they'd had like some big hits and everything. and yeah, their lead singer like ninjas, like full of energy, and it's always like doing all these high jumps and whatever on stage. And it's just like kind of continually seeing like Black women continue to defy stereotypes and like prove that, yeah, there's so much more that we can do. I think is just like helping to spread the word, really. Like the Black artists listening to at the moment are people like Vagabond, who again was like in a very indie genre, and just like kind of making all kinds of stuff, like yeah, like R&B and stuff as well, or even like people like Solange. Like I don't think you can necessarily like pin down her to one genre anymore, and I think that's quite exciting. So I think like maybe like getting out there and also learning about our history as well in music has really helped. Like when you kind of dig back and see like, oh, actually it's not that weird because Sister Rosetta Tharpe was a Black woman playing guitar like way back when, or what about the Black woman who was playing guitar for Prince, or like all these people. When you realize there's a long kind of history of it, you're kind of like, oh yeah, of course it makes sense that maybe I would want to do it as well.
In terms of acting, I feel like one thing that I've, started to do more consciously as like turn like 15, 16, was sort of surrounding myself with, like-minded and, like-minded people, for one, in terms of like, breaking these stereotypes, but also surrounding myself with other sort of Black creatives is also very important. Like I'll work with, everybody and anybody, but like I do feel like there's not many of us as it is. So it's always good to like be there to support each other and sort of be together and be supportive of like, of each other's work, of, putting each other on by, putting them in the play or putting them in the film, or, writing them into something. That's always important. But then it's also about, just being there to sort of protect each other when you do something and someone else comes along and it's just like, that's not normal, that's not right, or that's not acceptable. And you being like, that has a place in the canon too. It should be here, and it should be accepted and, visible for everyone to see. And yeah, I do agree with the sort of sentiment of just sort of getting on with it and being like, not being scared to, as much as obviously, auditions is going to be my lifeline. There are going to be times where just because of, my integrity, I'm going to have to say no to that part because I know it's going to be, a tokenistic Black friend part, or thug number 3, or it's another struggle film. But yeah, that's what we got to do.
I did want to just add it a bit. I don't know if anyone else wanted to jump in as well, but yeah, I think what you said about like finding community or like shared community has been really helpful as well. Like being able to find like other people with similar interests when I moved back to London really helped me. And like I mentioned with Decolonise Fest as well, like just like I think the first kind of early meetings we had trying to organise that festival was more just people of colour like sharing their experiences and like realising things we had in common, or just like, yeah, being able to like kind of have each other's back and support and stuff. And I think being able to put on this festival every year where we know like we're promoting POC artists, and then obviously they are all chosen because we like their music or whatever, it's not for any other reason. And yeah, just kind of being able to have a platform that's specifically promoting them or encouraging new bands as well, like new POC artists who might, not know where to look for somewhere to play, and being able to give advice and things like that. I think that's been like a really big part of it, and it's been quite good. Like I think as like my band's platform grows as well, trying to use that as a way to like turn people onto other POC bands that maybe they haven't heard of yet or whatever. And yeah, just make sure you're kind of like paying it forward if you're in a position to do that.
All right, the next question. Ooh. So what do the 5 of you wish to see your generation accomplish, which past ones didn't and following ones might not? I know, it's a tough question.
That's a big question.
Abolition.
That's a big question. Okay. Boy, I'm gonna mute real quick.
I think what I'd like to see is like some black people that can actually make some, some really big record labels, somewhere they can be really mainstream and not just in rap and R&B. It takes a lot of work to get somewhere like that, but I'd like something like that to be possible and just widely known, because, I'd like us to just be a collective, much more tightly knit, because something like music is something that we're not represented in the arts as well. But with numbers, we can be able to do something. I think we should try. It'd be really good.
I've thought about it now, and do you know what? One thing I would like to see, more people of color being artistic directors in theaters, or even like deciding, you know what, I'm going to build my own theater or conservatoire for black people. I'm sure someone will have something to say about that and complain some way, somehow, but I think that is very, very important, because like I've been looking at the creative directors for all sorts of places often, and every time I'm looking, I'm like, it's a white male, another white male, upper class white male. And I'm like, firstly, there's no sort of diversity in terms, there are a few females, but there's not enough of them, for one. But like, I feel like we do need more color in that. I know one who is at the Old Vic, but I can't think of any other one. So I think it is very important, because cast, like, artistic directors are sort of very integral to what shows are being put on, and therefore will be integral to, who are cast. But even in that, I still want to see, in casting, people being like, you know what, I'm casting for, the ability to, bring something different to the stage. And I feel like, if we keep just doing the same sort of tired replays of Shakespeare, where, Othello's the only character that will be black, and any other time it's just, meh, it is what it is, then we're never going to progress and, see anything different on the stage. I feel like, it's very, 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 very important.
I was thinking as well that kind of with things like funding for the arts for black spaces as well, a lot of the times we do have to rely on kind of white actors and actresses to be able to fund most of our spaces. And I think that's really kind of messed up, because there are a lot of black artists, musicians, and directors that could invest into our communities, but a lot of that doesn't happen. Like, a lot of people tend to become rich, then kind of forget where they came from and invest nothing into it. And I see that kind of problem a lot with kind of rappers as well. Like, they just don't invest in things that would be important and be able to lift us up a lot. But it's a sad thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. Investing in each other's, that is definitely something. So when you get to a certain place, you fund your own. I mean, like, I was going to bring Tyler Perry into this, how he's got basically like an empire. And let me not speak on that one. Let me mute real quick.
No, I think Stormzy is quite a good example of kind of giving back, because obviously he's done a lot, particularly in the last couple of years. I know, obviously, like, one of the big things is he's got that scholarship for Cambridge, I think it is. And like, obviously people are still complaining about that, but he's doing it. It's fine.
Yeah, I think similarly to Etienne, it'd be great to have more like, I guess, like collective and sustainable POC run spaces in music. And I think, yeah, like I'd love to see a label, maybe a POC run label, but also that was offering like fair terms to artists, because there's so much kind of like just like bad contracts being offered to people who want to get into music like because they love it and, you know, hopefully could like live off it if possible, but like a lot of the people at the top offer really unfavorable terms, and it would be nice to see a way to overturn this kind of the unfairness of streaming at the moment and how like so little revenue goes to like artists, like any artists. And yeah, also like just the dominance of the algorithm as well, kind of dismantle that a bit, because like I get recommended like a lot of like white indie artists on Spotify, and that's like that would not be my go-to, and just like I see it and I don't know how to undo it. So I'd like some more kind of research into that. Maybe just, you know, like topple Spotify, but don't tell them I said that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I unmuted myself and then immediately muted myself again. Cool. Right. How do you gain support from fellow Black people? It's quite difficult for me as a South Asian to gain support from South Asian people because often they feel I'm not staying true to South Asian culture and being too Scottish, or I don't know what I'm on about, but because I'm not from South Asia, I'm not taken seriously. Is that an issue for British/American/Australian Black people versus African Caribbean Black people?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of, like a big thing that a lot of people from POC kind of backgrounds face is just like kind of diverting away from something that is usual from your community, so it kind of becomes like you're straying away, and something like that is quite a tough thing, and I'm not exactly sure how we can move from that, but it's kind of the thing where we'd have to kind of rely from of our generations after us to try and change, because I actually have no idea. But if you can, there's lots of Facebook groups and Twitter groups, and there's loads of spaces that would be able to have people like you. It's just a matter of finding them, and that's the thing. Sorry, that wasn't quite helpful.
No, I think that is a very good point. Like it does happen a lot, and a big part of it is just, you know, knowing your own worth in terms of your identity, in terms of this sort of whole creative thing, whether you're a painter or a musician or an actor, that, you know, you'll always be Black, and that, you know, being born here just sort of caused this sort of double consciousness to come into play, where you're both, you know, just trying to hold on to your Afro-Caribbean, South Asian heritage, and but you were born here after all, so you are going to be sort of British in a different way, but Black British. So you're outside of one circle and you're outside another, and it's very complicated, and and it's about sort of being like, you know, I understand that you know, I struggle to fit in both, and sort of finding the middle ground and the synthesis between the two, because there'll always be someone out there that will call you a sellout for whatever reason, whether that be that, oh yeah, you've chosen to do punk music and that's not Black music, when logistically we invented that. But yeah, I said it anyway. Let me stop, let me behave. Or, you know, when I go into doing acting, and, you know, and I'm out here doing contemporary plays and speaking in perfect RP English, and that is that will be a problem for another person. But at the end of the day, we're doing our art we're doing it for the culture, but we're also doing it because we're here trying to represent our art and being like, look, we are allowed to be in Shakespeare, we are allowed to do punk music, we are allowed to do naked portraits for the Tate. Like, we're allowed to do these things because after all, we're human too. And a big part of us asking to be asking for representation is because we want to experience this sort of humanity that for a long time was taken away from us and dampened, and to this day is still dampened in many various different ways. And it's about sort of reclaiming that humanity, being like, look, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that, I should be allowed to do that. That's how I sort of see representation is. And I guess the sort of easiest way to deal with that is sort of, I don't know, sometimes you have to just sit your aunties down and talk to them and let them know what's going on. That like, I am doing this for the culture. By me saying, I'm gonna give up my time to train to go and perform a set on the stage, or go and recite soliloquies for 3 hours, when logistically 400 years ago that wouldn't have been possible, or even before that, people would have thought, nah, black people are this way and black people are that way, and sort of break those chains through my art. That's what we do. I'm gonna mute now.
Yeah, like, just to kind of agree with what Etienne said again, I think, like, because I'm sure it can be like really easy to feel like quite isolated if you're existing along all these intersections of being like South Asian but Scottish as well, or like born in Scotland, and having these two like cultures coming together. But like, yeah, like online groups are really, or just like the internet in general, is a really good place to look for people who exist along those same intersections as you do as well, and like yeah, like, can identify with that experience, and how it's, it is like hard and annoying at times to have like your own family saying things like that, when you're like, well, but aren't I both these things, and like, isn't that fine? So yeah, and I think I've definitely connected with people online as well, who, yeah, maybe share like similar experience of being like British born, but like Afro-Caribbean parents and stuff, or like first gen British in their family, and what that's like. And yeah, I think we're really lucky now, and just that there just seems to be so many different like groups for like whatever your niche is. And yeah, like, that's, I think, yeah, that's just quite a good place to look for support, really.
We'll move on to our final question now. It's nearly over, don't worry. So yeah, how do you overcome people overlooking you for exhibitions and performances, even if there's only one Black person? How do you encourage more when the board is full of white/whitewashed people?
Blackmail.
It's a very difficult thing because a lot of us wish we knew ourselves, I'm sure.
Oh my. Who is writing these questions? Oh, give me a hold on. How do we?
I'm not sure I want to convince a board of white people to hire me.
This is very, yeah, this is what I'm saying. That's what I'm thinking.
Why should I have to convince you?
Exactly.
Hire me.
Do you know what I was literally about to say that, you know, at this point, it's either we flood them with enough until it's being like, we've got so many, we've got to cast someone because, you know, they're all so talented, or we go and take the, you know, people we have and just start building our own little houses, own little communities. And I'm gonna keep saying this over and over again that, like, at this point, I want to build my own round table and sit there with my, you know, my Black Knights and discuss, you know, what's the next move? What's the next
Can I be at that
production?
table?
Yes, come to the table. This is what we want. No, it's me.
This is what they're scared of, to be honest.
I know this. We are live. Everyone's gonna see this. Do you know what? Forget it. They can see it. But no, this is what I mean. Like this, even this here, I'm just like, I love this because, like, obviously, we're all artists. We're all discussing. We're all thinking about the problem. This in itself is a sort of metaphysical table for us to talk about these things and think about these issues and sort of build each other up and support each other. Like, you know, Stella's got a band. Let's go and listen to the band and support it and fund it. And then, you know, with that, she'll get more following. I mean, Etienne has been saying that it's an economic business. And, like, if that's the case, even if it's just us four start supporting and then we get our friends to do it and they get their friends to do it, that's uplift. That's one way of uplift elevation. You know, for us as actors, I've started writing and, like, you know, logistically with whatever funds I can, hiring out a hall and being like, I'm going to put in this production and then promoting myself and having my friends promote, you know, even if I have like 20 people on the first night and then they go home and be like, wow, that was amazing. And they go and recommend it to another 20 people and then bring them along. That's 40 people. And I guess we're going to have to sort of start from scratch at this point because if they don't let us in the door, then, you know, yeah, building our own spaces is my answer again.
No, yeah, I agree with that as well. Like, that's kind of what Decolonized Fest is about, and why we say it's a festival like by punks of color, for punks of color, even though it's about other genres as well. But it was like, you know, we can get angry at Reading and Leeds every year for not having enough people of color, never having enough women, or we can put on our own festival that's full of people of color, just like actually paying attention to gender representation, queer representation, making sure it's at an accessible venue, like making sure it's the kind of festival that you would want to go to, like full of artists we would want to see, like artists from all different kinds of heritages. And like, obviously this year had to be online, but the past 3 years, it's just been getting bigger and bigger, and it's creating a community because people are coming from all over. Some people are coming by themselves and finishing the weekend having made new friends because they've attended like a workshop that we did or something, or just got chatting to like other POC like music fans in the audience or whatever. Or white people have come and then like, you know what, I didn't know about all these punk bands and now I'm gonna go to their shows and tell all my friends about them. And you know, it doesn't matter that these artists weren't getting on the radio or whatever. So I think like for us in that sphere, it's felt more rewarding to just build what we wanted to see rather than have to like continue to ask people to give us a platform when they clearly weren't interested in doing so. So that's what I'd have to say about it.
Yeah, I think the kind of building our own spaces is probably our best option. I know I got tired of not being able to see myself represented in various things, but in particular, I used to do a lot of writing when I was younger, and I got just so tired of either seeing a POC character that was just the sassy best friend, or was a slave who was so sad and, oh, you should just feel sorry for her. So I just wrote my own story, and the main character is a badass black woman who is not a slave, and she's not someone's best friend. She's just there, and she's being great. And like that's what we need to do. We just need to, you know, if we don't see ourselves represented, we have the ability to, we just need to make that representation. So yeah. So thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being wonderful guests and answering all these questions. I hope you guys had a great time. I know I did. And if anyone wants to fund Darius's round table, just let us know. We'll get that happening.
Yes, please. I'll start on what is it? GoFundMe? I don't know what these funding websites are. But yeah, no. Thank you for having us, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
it's been really
you.
great to chat. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks.